All right, hello and welcome back to the Basic Bible Podcast. I'm your host, Kevin Thompson. And coming back on the podcast is Barnabas Piper. Barnabas, welcome back to the podcast.
Man, thanks for having me back. It's good to be on with you.
I know you've been dying to come back. It's been your lifelong wish, and so here we are.
I know all it takes is writing another book and then just trying to get back on your radar. That's really what I seek to achieve.
Well, now you have Kim. You've arrived. We're hoping the book is going to be on the New York Times bestseller list now.
Wouldn't that be nice?
The Basic Bible Podcast, mega conglomeration, media mogul, whatever. But speaking of media mogul issues, I do have one issue that we should probably clear up on the air. I got a copy of your previous book, The Happy Rant, which of course is the podcast that you co-host. And when I opened the package, I didn't have a trophy. Was that like an error, or was that
No, it was not an error. It was that went to those people who need the most sort of back patting, back scratching. To those who are secure in their influencer status, what do you need a 4-inch tall trophy for? You've arrived. You don't need the assurance that you've really nailed it already.
I mean, we have ratings literally in the double digits now. No, it's actually better than that. But anyway, we're going to be talking about your latest book, Belong, Loving Your Church by Reflecting Christ to One Another. And before we get to that, I do have one other question. So you're a dad. You've got 2 daughters. And I'm looking for some help, some fatherly advice.
I will see what I can do. I feel like most of parenting, especially teenagers, is an exercise in feeling like I don't know what I'm doing. But
all right,
let's talk.
So I'm not a sports guy.
Okay.
You're a sports guy.
I am.
And, I'm a nerd. I am following this speakers race closer than any sports games I've ever watched. I'm a political guy. I'm that guy.
Okay.
We just literally had a party in my classroom, a watch party for Vote 13. But I try to keep up to date with stuff to communicate with my students and, more importantly, communicate with my kids. I want to know what's going on in the sports world. And I've had a problem in the recent weeks, and I hope you can help me with this. My son, Tommy, is 11 years old. He's in 5th grade. We live in Beloit, Wisconsin. Somehow, this kid has become a Vikings fan. Is there something I could do about this?
I would lean towards those psalms that talk about abandonment by the Lord, and how long, O Lord, and those, because you're going to need those in your pocket because they're going to break his heart. So the Lord disciplines those he loves. That's a good one for Vikings fans, because there's just you can gently remind him when his heart is broken that this is protection from idolatry. There's a lot of good that comes out of being a Vikings fan. On the spiritual side, not on the sports side. So, and then, he's also living in Beloit, Wisconsin. He has chosen a lot where he's basically going to be opposed to everybody around him, which some people thrive on that. Most people, they're going to need some picking up. So you're going to have some opportunities to encourage him when he comes home after Aaron Rodgers obliterates them again. That's the Packers quarterback, non-sports guy. And he's going to need, some hugs and some space and some fatherly wisdom.
Yeah. Well, I mean, it was fun watching last week's game.
I'm sure it was.
The Packers doing the gritty after a Jefferson tackle was great. And that's about as much as I know sports-wise.
The fact that you as a non-sports guy just mentioned Jefferson and gritty means you're doing better than you think you are. So well done.
Well, my kids were adopted, and when our first child came in, he was a Bears fan. And my wife was almost ready to just say, no, this isn't going to work. But fortunately, she got over that. But then he became a Patriots fan, which I'm from New England. So, and I'm looking at, again, this is my knowledge here. From what I understand, I try to be conversant. So the Patriots have to beat the Bills next week to make it to the playoffs. beating the Bills in Buffalo this week of all weeks with Damar Hamlin situation, I don't think there's a soul outside of New England who's rooting for them. And maybe that was true before. But
yeah, I mean, the residual New England hate still, I mean, the Brady Belichick evil
yeah,
empire thing, there's still residue of that, even though they don't resemble the same team. But yeah, nobody wants anything except to see the Bills win. Like, it doesn't even matter, and it doesn't matter that it's the Patriots. It could be anybody, just to see, Damar Hamlin honored. And I mean, apparently there's wonderful reports about his health, but even if he could like make it like a video from him or whatever, that stadium will disintegrate with excitement. So yeah, nobody's rooting for the Patriots.
And so my listeners are now realizing they are shocked at the amount of knowledge I have just displayed here.
I know. Are you going to be disowned by anybody because you've given over to the dark side, both sports and the Patriots?
No, see, I would still consider myself a Patriots fan. In fact, if we were scanned back, you could see the Patriots banners in my classroom.
Okay,
I do it just because they're hated. And I came to this school right in the middle of Deflategate and all that stuff.
Oh, nice.
And so I just like to tick people off. And
you're just a troll. You're a real life.
I am.
I do appreciate the boldness that you're not just like, this isn't an online thing. This is a right in people's face thing.
Yes.
That takes a lot more guts. That's bold of you.
Yeah. So I don't know if I could name Mac Jones. I know Mac Jones. Outside of that, I couldn't name anybody on the team. But there was a James White, and I only know him because of the theologian James White. But
very different. Anyway. One of whom is much more likable than the other, and we're just going to leave it at that. Listeners can decide.
Yes. Anyway, James White has been on this podcast, the theologian, although it was an interview from like 10 years ago when I could still stomach some of what he was. Anyway, he's gone a little too more political for me, and I'm a political guy. But anyway, we're talking about your book, Belong.
Yes.
And so I enjoyed your book. Now, the last time you were on here, we talked about your book on happiness. Mm-hmm. And I confess I didn't actually read a lot of the book at that point. This book is much shorter, and I did completely read it. So there's no excuse for me not reading it this time. And I read it and I enjoyed it. It's like I said, it's a small book. It's very easy to understand. I think one of the things I like about it most is your discussion guide, your study questions at the end of each chapter, which you call action points. And they're leading you not just for discussion, but okay, let's do something about what we just read. This isn't going to be something we're just going to talk about and chat about and then, never think about it again. But so I appreciate that. But the book is not, when I originally read it, I'm used to reading, 9 marks of a healthy church or, how to be a good church member. And this isn't that.
No.
You're talking about the sense of belonging to a church. And you make the point that belonging doesn't equal membership. You can belong to a church and not be a member of it. Some churches don't have membership. And then you can be a member of a church and not feel that belonging. So what do you mean by that basic idea of belonging to a church?
Yeah. And so this is not a book about membership process. It's not a book about it's not an ecclesiology book in that way. It is much more a sense of it's a book about the sense of living in God's design for the body of Christ. So the sense of belonging, and I'm reluctant to use the word sense because that sounds very fluid. The reality of belonging, because it is a design of God's, is found in when a person discovers what life is like inside of the New Testament's description of a healthy church, in terms of thinking specifically of the one another commands is one of the best ways to sort of gauge that. Love one another, bear with one another, forgive one another, exhort one another, teach one another, pray with one another, and so forth. And so belonging is when church feels like the closest family. When you're somebody who doesn't have a close family, or your family is not believers, and you go, oh, this is it. This is what Jesus was talking about when he said, in me you will have 100-fold mothers and fathers and brothers and sisters. So it's the discovery of that in a local church. And that's why I say it's not necessarily tied to membership. If a church has membership, I'm fully in favor of people becoming members, because that's a giving of yourself to commitment. But some churches don't have formal membership. That does not mean they don't have a lively Christ-shaped body and community.
Yeah. So the church, you said, is like a family, and there's other illustrations as well. You talk about the building, even though it's not, we're not talking about a physical building, but there are blocks that are in place and whatnot. It's built upon the foundation of Christ. You talked about the idea of church being a body, and I was a little offended. You mentioned the idea of amputation, and specifically you mentioned like a toe, an arm or a toe, whatever. I just had a toe amputated. So I'm going to go all snowflake here and say how offended I am. I'll be the Karen. And so we'll just put that up there. But
I mean, my mother had a big toe amputated. I grew up with a 9-toed parent. So I thought that I thought I was safe. It's like that. I have one of these in my family. I thought I could speak freely about the amputation aspect.
Okay. Well, that gives you a pass then. And ironically, all of my kids are really great at soccer, but that's the one sport I really can't help them out with. Not that I can help them out with any sport, but the church as a family, you mentioned, and I love this point here, that belonging doesn't always mean you're comfortable. You use the idea of a hospital. In fact, you use it twice, and I want to talk about both times. I thought it was really interesting. A hospital is sometimes where you need to be. Again, I was just at the hospital. I didn't enjoy it. I hated it, just about every minute of it. And I wanted to leave because I knew this isn't where I should be. But I also knew at this time, it's where I need to be. Tell us a little bit about, expound upon that a little bit.
Yeah. So the significant point there is that belonging is based off of, like I said earlier, it's based off of design. Yeah. There's a moral reality to it. So there's a sense of belonging, a sense of the word belonging that is, I feel at home here. And then there's a sense of this is where I must be. So if you're in the middle of a medical emergency, you belong at the hospital.
Right.
Or if your loved one is, in critical condition, or if you have a child in the NICU, you belong at the hospital with your loved one. There's a sense of you must be there. That is the right place for you for all of these realities. And so, and the church is that. And so it's not always a sense of belonging like, oh, I found my people, I found my place. It's you need to be here in order to be healed, repaired, or to walk with others through that according to what God intends.
Yeah. And even the idea of church as a family doesn't always equal comfort. I mean, anybody with a family knows there are uncomfortable moments, and you've got the crazy uncle at the dinner table, or you've got the aunt that we don't talk about, or
just the siblings who you're constantly just like bickering with or whatever. Like there's just family was probably the analogy I had the hardest time with, because it's where the most relational friction. It's where relational friction comes the most easily. So saying the church is a family often is like, ugh, really? Does it have to be? Well, God came up with that idea, both of family and of church. And so you have to look at the design for both of those things to be able to go, okay, when we say church is family, we're not talking about abusive, dysfunctional families. We're talking about God's intent for families.
Right. And so you also use this illustration of a hospital a couple chapters later. We're talking about the idea of, yes, we want people to come to the church, quote, just as you are. And that phrase has probably been overused, and it's been abused and whatnot. But we do need to come to a place where your sin is not necessarily welcomed, but invited. The idea being your sin should be on display for a purpose. I think in some places your sin is almost like bragging rights. Well, I'm this or I'm that. That's just how I am, and that's my problem, and whatever. But it stops there. But in the book, you're saying no. You need to be open and honest about your sin to begin with. We're not going to hide it. And I've been in churches growing up where that was it. You show up to church, you sit in your pew, you wear your coat and tie, and you smile, you fold your hands, and you put on the performance. Instead, we should be open about our hurts, open about our sin, open about our struggles, but for a purpose. Like,
Yeah.
again, a patient going to the doctor. It doesn't help to hide your problems to the doctor.
Right. Yeah.
You want them to know for the purpose of healing.
Yeah, I mean, there's very few things that are dumber than lying to a doctor.
Yeah.
Because there's a doctor patient privilege, which is not dissimilar from what we should have in the church. We should have the understanding that you can come in here and confess and admit to the things that you are most ashamed of. And we will not, pearl clutch and gasp and how could you and what we will absorb that because the great physician is really the one at work here. Yeah. So we're not, and we will protect your dignity.
Right.
We're not going to shame you. We're not going to blab it. We're not going to gossip about you. We're not going to be, did you hear what so-and-so said? So there's that reality. And then there's just the simple reality of we can't get healthy until all of the sinful symptoms are being addressed by the great physician. And so there has to be just a full layout of where we are. I mean, it's like, I'm probably going to offend some listener to this. When I go to the doctor and they're like, do you smoke? Well, what does that mean? Like how many cigars a month is smoking versus not smoking? Is like, and the answer is just yes, I do. Not packs a day, but like I smoke cigars sometimes. Okay. I just need to say yes. And the doctor can then tell me if that affects any of these other medical things going on, because he might say that's actually triggering these other symptoms and you should probably stop. But if I lie to him, I'm not giving him the information. So it's that little kind of thing, but it's two-sided there. There's the reception of it and then our trust as sinners in the safety and the need for the healing through the gospel.
So I had a student last year from Cuba. And so whenever he went to see his family, he brought me a whole bunch of Cuban cigars. And I don't even smoke cigars, but it was pretty nice.
And you now have, if you don't smoke them, you have gifts that will please.
And that's,
you have gifts that will please people. Let's put it that way.
Yeah, I gave them to my pastor who loved it. So scandalous, my pastor smokes cigars. Actually, not my current pastor. Actually, I don't know if he does. But anyway.
Oh, so that's what got him fired. You gave him cigars.
Yeah.
He's not your pastor anymore. Bummer.
So Phil, if you're listening, sorry. All right. So moving on, you talk about the need for unity. And I'm looking at our time here because I've got a basketball game to get to. I got to make the tip off. But you talk about the need for unity within the church. Mm-hmm. And there are two things I wanted to bring up here real quick. But the facade of friendly unity, which is kind of what we just talked about, the idea of you put on your show, you pretend to be more spiritual than you are. And of course, the problem with that is everything is hidden. You're not going to be able to deal with anything. And, like Luther said, sin boldly and nothing. It's a facade and that's just not real. And then I want to ask you about and this is, if we hadn't get controversial yet, but the faux vanity of against this. And I've seen this so many times and it's easy to get into.
Yeah.
Because we can preach against Hollywood and we can preach against the liberals and we can preach against the compromisers and all these things. And we're going to be not just pro-life, but anti-abortion and whatever the latest bandwagon is for conservatives or whatever. We can always be against something. And it's easy to coalesce around those issues, but again, in reality, it's faux. It's not really actual biblical unity.
Right. Yeah. So the first one, the faux unity of sort of friendliness or pleasantness it's easier to recognize or easier for people to kind of be like, yeah, that's nonsense. So I live in the Bible Belt now. I'm in Nashville. My parents grew up in the South here. I spent a lot of time here growing up. There is a niceness in the South that veils all sorts of nastiness. So there's, less so now than it used to be, but it's still kind of it's a really nice place. People are nice.
Yeah.
But not talking about difficult things is not the same as being unified in the midst of difficult things. It has nothing in common with being unified in Christ. Which is how you work through controversies or how you reconcile or how, as Ephesians talks about, it breaks down the dividing wall of hostility. And so niceness is not unity. It's actually avoidance.
Right.
And so when that stuff rears its head, that's how you have churches that will split over the stupidest, pettiest things, because they only know how to avoid, not process through with a governing principle of Jesus first. Now what do we do?
Right.
The againstness is more insidious, because you can do things in the name of the gospel with great passion and fervor, and look like you're defending the truth, and maybe in some sense you are, but in reality you are not unified in Christ. You are unified around an enemy.
Yeah.
And inevitably that battle comes to an end.
Right.
Every group that has been unified around an enemy disintegrates at some point. Yep. There become factions. They win the war. Congratulations, you won. Now what marks you? Now you're aimless, you're identityless, because the unity is not for Christ. Whereas if we are unified around, okay, we are going to uphold the name of Jesus and we're going to live according to what Jesus said, there are certain things we will be against, and they will come and go. You know, the political, the societal, those things will come and go, and we will steadily march through our life towards Christ in oneness as a church. And we won't always agree. Unity and agreement are not the same thing. Unity means, come hell or high water, I'm not letting go of you. Right. We will see this thing through and do our best to honor Christ in it, even though we're going to be different politically. We're going to take different stances on this. We may really get mad at each other for a little while, but we will not allow it to fracture the relationship of this church.
One final issue I want to bring up, and I think was worth the price of the book. This really hit me more than anything else. You have a chapter, what if I have a bad experience with the church? Mm-hmm. And I mean, there's so much here we can get into, but I want to get into this issue here. So what if I don't belong? What if I don't have that feeling? And you said there's a difference between going through the checklist.
Yeah.
You know, does it have exegetical sound preaching? Does it have biblical eldership? And does it? You could go through the 9 marks or whatever. And that's where I've been for many years. But then you posed the question, maybe it's not those things, but is there the aroma of Christ within that church setting? Describe that.
Oh man, it's one of those, like, it's easier to recognize than to describe situations. But my experience is probably fairly similar to yours for a long time, where when I was in a position to need to look for a new church because I'd moved to a new place or whatever, I would have sort of the mental checklist, you know, biblical or expository preaching, this kind of theology. And you kind of run it down, and you start with the certain essentials, and you get into the preferences. You know, I prefer this kind of music, whatever. And I ended up at some churches that checked, you know, 9 out of 10 boxes, say, which is a really good ratio. And I didn't find the life of Christ there.
Yeah.
Because there's a big difference between gospel doctrine. So I'm going to steal phrases from Ray Ortland here. His pastoring of me and his writing was very influential in this book as a whole. But there's a huge difference between just having gospel doctrine, believing and espousing the right things, doing things in the right order, etc., and gospel culture, which is where the reality and the life of Christ just sort of comes out. It's in the water, it's in the air, it's in the conversation, where there's a vibrance, there's an honor, there's a joy, there's a welcome, there's a safety for sinners and confession. Anybody who has been around the Reformed world, and it's true of the kind of the fundamentalist world too, where there is just we are Bible believing, rigorous Christians, and they're just jerks.
Yeah. Like,
just to put it frankly, they're just mean-spirited, good theological people. Well, congratulate that is denying with your life what you espouse with your mouth.
Right.
The aroma of Christ is where, when you come into a place, before you know their theology, you go, this place feels like Christ is in the room. Yeah. That's it. And I don't know how to describe it other than that, but there are so many churches that have it because Jesus is real and shapes them. and you know it when you find it, and it's beautiful.
Well, Barnabas, thank you so much for joining us here this week on the podcast. So our recommended resource this week, Belong, Loving Your Church by Reflecting Christ to One Another by Barnabas Piper. And check out the Happy Rant. If you're done with your basic Bible podcast, there's other podcasts out there. Check out the Happy Rant. Check out the Happy Rant book as well. I haven't started reading that one yet, but I'm sure it's good. But thank you, Barnabas, for coming on.
Yeah, thank you. It's been great to be on with you.
So again, check us out, www.basicbiblepodcast.org. And I know some of you keep telling me I don't need the www, but I'm old. I'm set in my ways, and that's how it is. Check us out on Facebook, Twitter, all the socials. So until next week, have a great rest of your week.